This song, like all our songs, are dedicated to children.
I also became a raw food chef, and there's recipes in here as well. There's before and afters, and so on. And then I went on to write this next book, Raw Knowledge, Enhance the Powers of Your Mind, Body, and Soul, which is more interviews with people, other people who've been eating this way for a very long time. Then I went on to write this book, Healing Inflammatory Bowel Disease. And this book should be called Healing All Disease, actually, because the information in there will help people heal all disease. It exposes doctors and the way they treat people and so on. I think my next book might be called, If You Want to Be Healthy, Eliminate Your Doctor. And this is actually the newest version of this book. It just came out 2 days ago. I can't say it's hot off the press because I'm a raw foodist and I can't 108 degrees off the press. But it just came out. It's brand new information. It's a completely new book. And then I had all this information out and I was traveling all over and teaching, but for some reason people weren't getting it. People were sicker than ever. They would come to my lecture. They'd chuckle every now and then, but they weren't going home and doing it. I wanted them to get this. So I just kept looking for the answer and looking for the answer. And it was about 6 years ago. I was in Michigan giving a lecture. And at the end of the lecture, a fellow came to me and said, "Paul, your book is the second best health book I ever read." And I was curious to know what the first one was. And he said, "Not only will I tell you, I'll give you one on 2 conditions." He said, the first condition is that before you develop an opinion about the book, you read the whole book. I said, "How can I develop an opinion about it unless I read the whole book?" He said, the next condition is, if you don't like it, you give it back to me, but if you like it, you tell other people about it. I said, "That's fine, give me the book." He gave me the book and I read the whole book, and I have to agree with him, it's the greatest health book ever written. The book was the Bible. And I found more information about health in that book than any other book ever written. And I was upset. The reason why is because 10 years prior to that, I was sitting in some doctor's office and somebody told me the same thing. And I said no thank you at that time, and I didn't read it. I would have saved myself a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of pain if I would have read it back then. All this information that it took me years to learn about health and nutrition and about what foods are best for the body and when to eat them and how to eat them and other aspects of health, the emotional and spiritual aspects of health, was all there in this one great book. But then I ran into a problem because I started to teach in churches. And to my disappointment, thinking everyone would be healthy in these places because they had this great health book right in their hands, I saw more prayer for the healing of disease than any other topic. And I was like, what is wrong? If these people have such a great health book, how come they're not getting better? And I didn't understand. Then I realized information alone without information and knowledge without action means very little. We can't just know it. We have to take action and carry it out. And that's what people weren't doing. They had the information, but they weren't taking action to follow it. So I said something was really wrong here. So I ended up writing this book, Health According to the Scriptures, which talks about the health message found in the Bible, and it has all these scriptures in here that talk about a lot of the principles we're going to cover today in my new lecture. So I wrote that book, and I was done with writing. I wasn't going to write any more. And my personal story was becoming too long, so I had to stop inventing new things. So then what happened was I started learning the 3 true methods of healing. We're not taking drugs by the doctor, but it was the herbs, the oils, and the prayer. That's what it said in the scriptures, and that's what every health book I've ever read confirmed. The 3 methods of healing are herbs, oils, and prayer. Hippocrates said himself, "Let food be thy medicine." The scriptures say themselves, the medicine is in the herbs. The essential oils that come from the flowers and the herbs, that's the medicine that'll heal us. And the prayer is the greatest thing to heal us. And not only heal us, people always ask me, how can I get my family or my friends to eat this way? I just keep alienating them. Every time I try to tell them what to do, they get more pushed away. And here's my answer. You tell them once and you pray for them many times. That's it. And that works. You tell them one time and pray many times. It's the opposite of what I used to do, and I turned more people off than I could have mentioned about this. So then I was doing all that, and as I started praying, this name kept coming up in my mind. I kept hearing this name over and over again. And then I remembered one morning what that name was from. I had read a health book years prior to that, and it was an excellent health book. It was probably one of the greatest health books I've ever read until I had read the scriptures themselves. And the name that kept coming up in my mind was Arnold Ehret. Has anyone here ever heard of Arnold Ehret? And the name of the book that I read was this book here, probably the greatest name for a book ever written, The Mucusless Diet Healing System. If that's not a great name for a book, I don't know what is. The Mucusless Diet Healing System. And he wrote another book called Rational Fasting. Like there's any other kind of fasting, right? Rational Fasting. And then he has this book. They found this in his manuscript and translated it after he had passed on, The Cause and Cure of All Human Illness. So then he had this book out as well. And Arnold Ehret was a fellow that came from Germany, and as a young man he was very sick in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he cured himself naturally by following the methods that we're going to talk about today in the principles of this lecture. And he came to the United States to teach everyone about this message as well. And then he wrote these books, and all of his books had something in common. He called it the formula for life. And I am convinced, I call it the formula for health. I am convinced that this formula for health, which is the premise of my new book, which I combine the information found in the scriptures, the information that I received at Hippocrates Health Institute, the information I got from all these other interviews of the people I've interviewed, and to top it all off, the formula for health. I don't care whatever diet is you decide to eat, whether it be a 100% raw food diet, a regular diet that has a lot of fruits and vegetables in it, or even if it's a lousy diet. If you follow these principles, your health is going to improve. We're going to talk about the formula for health this evening. But before we get to this formula, I want to talk about what's going to motivate people the most to be healthy. Because I've learned from my doctor that opposites attract. I've learned from my doctor, if you tell somebody to do something, they like to do the opposite. People seem to be interested in the opposite. My doctor was so bad, not only did everything she told me to do have an opposite effect, but even the names of the things she told me to do have an opposite effect. I'll never forget, I was taking a test, the doctor wanted to run some tests on me and everything else. I got to tell this little story here to understand about opposites. The doctor told me we're going to have to take some tests. And remember, I didn't know anything about health and nutrition at that time. And it was the first time in my life I ever heard the words, we're going to have to clean you out. And I didn't know what that meant. I'm thinking, I got health insurance, so it's not going to be a problem. So she hands me this gas tank with nothing in it, except a little powder at the bottom of it. And she said, drink this. First thing she told me was I'm going to have to go on a liquid diet. And I said, I'm not into those fruits and vegetables. She said, no, a liquid diet, according to doctors, was Jell-O, coffee, and all this. I said, no problem with that. So I went on a liquid diet. I said, okay, I'm cleaned out. She said, no, now you got to drink this stuff. Now, you talk about opposites and inappropriate names for things. Not only did this thing clean me out, this drink, but it probably cleaned all the pipes in my bathroom out as well. The name of this drink was the most inappropriate name for a drink and the most deceptive name of anything. It was called Go Lightly. It made me do everything but that. A more appropriate name for this drink would have been Fire in the Hole. So I learned from the doctor that opposites had a lot to way to impact people. So I said, that's it. I want to teach people about health. So how can I teach them about health? Well, I realized the greatest way to teach people about health is teach them about the opposite of what health is. What is the opposite of health? Disease. And I confirmed this as I've been traveling and asking people why they came to a health lecture. People weren't coming to a health lecture to learn about food or nutrition. I found the most motivating reasons people would come to a health lecture, there were three, and diet and nutrition wasn't one of them. The most motivating factor people came to health lecture was, if somebody was sick, how did they get well again? That was the number one factor. If somebody had a disease, how did they get rid of it? The next motivating factor was, if somebody wasn't sick, how did they avoid getting sick? And then the third motivating factor was, how could somebody stay looking young? Now, if somebody could be convinced that diet and nutrition has something to do with accomplishing these goals, it's then they start to look at diet and nutrition. But unfortunately, a majority of people today have been convinced and deceived to believe that they can accomplish these goals without changing their diet. How do I know that? Because when I still go in these fast food places,